This morning, I'm going to talk about a story that you find in Mark, Luke, and Matthew. So, where do you want? Well, if you want to turn to Matthew chapter 8, to kind of give you that one matches Luke chapter 8. So I don't care if you're in Matthew chapter 8 or Luke chapter 8. Mark chapter 8 only covers the storm at sea. This is a story about the storm at sea. Jesus is asleep in the boat. He wakes up. He calms the waves. They go over to the Gadarenes or Gergesene area, and he meets a demoniac out of the tomb. He casts out the legion of demons. They go into pigs. Pigs jump over the cliff, die. People say, get out of here. We don't want to. Okay, that's the story. And it's in all three. And I've told several of y'all that I am going to relax and not panic. If I have to get up here sometime, and for some reason the sermon doesn't fall together for me. Now, fortunately, because I know 3 or 4 weeks ahead of time what I'm going to be preaching on. You read it out there on the sign. Next week I'm going to talk about sin killing innocent people. Then after that, I'm going to talk about Lazarus. So I know where I'm going, but if God doesn't speak something to my life, if He doesn't talk to me about who I am, where I am, and I get to respond, I have nothing to share. And the story starts out, and you read it in Mark, you read it in Luke, and Jesus had a huge crowd around him. There was a lot of people. His mother and his brothers and sisters wanted to come and see him and could not get close to him because of the crowd. And Jesus then decides that he's going to get into a boat and go across the sea. Now, when I see pictures of Jesus, he seems to always be going. I must needs go through Samaria. I got to talk to a woman who's at the well. He calls disciples. He does it by not going into the temple, but going out where guys are fishing, or go out where Matthew is collecting taxes. Jesus is always going. Now, that doesn't sound like me. I'm not going. Jesus says, I come to seek and to save that which is lost. Me? No, we're going to have revelations. Let's invite people to come. Here we are. Come. Come to church. Jesus was the type that go. He went. And I'm a little stubborn. I'm not going. I don't know about you, but sometimes I get and I tell God exactly the way I see things, okay? And God's not threatened by that. Other people, God, this is how I see things. This is how I like things. And there's a little saying out there. If you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans. Yeah. And my life has been so blessed. I am just amazed at what God has done in my life. I'm so glad I wasn't in charge. Life is abundantly better than I would have ever imagined. But I still have my own ideas sometimes. Jesus said, let's get in a boat and go. And where did he say he wanted to go to? He wanted to go to the land of the Gadarenes or Gergesenes. Now, names are different, so it's going which translation you're reading or what. I don't know about you, but I like to go to Civil War battlefields. Don't go a whole lot. But you know what? The battle was called differently based upon which side you were fighting on. Had a different name. And the same thing happens throughout the Bible. It's according to who's doing the naming, who's calling it such. We even see it in modern times, such as Kiev. Used to be K-I-E-V. Now we're spelling it K-Y-V-J. I don't know. We're spelling with a K-Y. And so it happens in modern times just like that. He says, I'm going over there. Now this was a place that no good Jew would go. The people over there, they ate sausage and ham and bacon. A Jew would never eat pigs. And they had pigs over there. Jesus made a decision to go over there whenever he had a huge crowd that where his mother, his brothers and sisters could not even reach. He was reaching a lot of people, and he decided to go over there where nobody wanted him, where they didn't even like one another. So now, let's see if I can find Matthew chapter 8. Jesus got in the boat with his disciples, on verse 22, and he said to them, let's cross over the other side of the lake. And they launched out. But as they sailed, he fell asleep, and a windstorm came down on the lake. And they were filling with water and in jeopardy. And they came and woke him and says, Master, we are perishing. You know, when I was younger, I heard a lot, and I still hear it some. The fact is, I know that what I'm doing is God's will because all the right doors opened up. People live in a different world than I did. Just because they were going where Jesus said they were going, life wasn't just smooth sailing. A storm came up. And I love going on mission trips. Beverly and I haven't been since the pandemic hit. We have renewed our passports, so we could go again sometime. But to think the fact is that you're going where God told you to go and life is going to be smooth, it isn't going to happen. You know, I've heard, all the right doors were open, all the lights were green. God was in it. God's in it when there's trouble too. We're just not told that life is going to be easy. The great saints went through great persecution and remained faithful to Christ. And as these disciples went through the storm on the sea, and Jesus is taking a nap in the boat and wakes up and says, listen, we're going to drown. Water's coming into the boat. Jesus said, where's your faith? He is there to build up faith. I love the way that Jesus builds up faith. Here he is, there's a storm on the sea. Jesus is asleep in the hold. The next time there's a storm on the sea, Jesus is not in the boat. He comes walking to him on the water. By the time you get to the book of Acts, when the storms come up, Jesus is nowhere around. He has been resurrected. And he builds their faith in little faith-like steps. I learned that lesson whenever I was young. My mother was a great teacher. She was a good Sunday school teacher. She was also a good teacher to me. And we had a neighbor. We had a neighbor, Mrs. Jones. Now, Mrs. Jones, there was only a chain link fence that separated us as kids from her house. And if you walked across her yard, she would come out with a broom and chase you down. If we were playing with a ball in the backyard and it went over the fence, we had two choices. We could either watch that ball be picked up by Mrs. Jones and disappear forever. She must have had a basement full of balls that we had lost in her yard. Or you could take a risk and run over there real quick and grab the ball and hope to get back before you get beat with the broom. Well, Mrs. Jones didn't like us. We were scared of Mrs. Jones. And so I was talking to Mom about it. I says, I would like to be friends, Mrs. Jones. She says, why don't you pray? Okay, so I prayed that we'd be friends. It didn't happen. And Mom says, did you really believe it? Well, no. She says, pray a faith-sized prayer. Pray something that you can do that you believe that God would reveal to you. Well, okay, Mom. So I started praying what I could do. What I could do for Mrs. Jones. Well, it came up a snowstorm. I had a brilliant idea. Go shovel her driveway and walk. That's a nice thing to do for a neighbor. Now, I'm not brave enough to do that by myself. So I get every neighborhood kid to come with me. And so we're going to go up to her house. And I know, from my perspective, I was getting a lot of help to get a job done. From Mrs. Jones, can you imagine what went through her mind when she saw a bunch of kids with pitchforks and axes and such walking up to her driveway, okay? It didn't look the same to her as it did to me. And she came out and chased us off. And so I told Mom, says, I prayed. God said we could do something nice. And it went, she said, okay. God gave you something to do. God answered your prayer. Now pray a bigger prayer. Boy, that was a challenge. I thought about it. I wrestled with it. And then we were making jelly. My mother made great jelly. My favorite jelly was TA jelly. Now, when you make cherry jelly, you have to have so many. Anybody here make jellies? Besides Beverly. Edith, okay. And so it doesn't always come out exactly the same amount to match your gel. What do you do with the extra?
I add it to something else.
You add it to something else. And that's what my mother did. She would collect all these extras and they would put, she called it TA jelly. The reason why she called it TA, the TA standing for either Tiz apple or taint apple. One or the other. But it was my favorite jelly. I loved it. And put it in nice little jars because we gave it away as a gift. And I said, Mom, can I give that as a gift to Mrs. Jones? She said, sure. Because my prayer was that I could do something that Mrs. Jones would like. And so that was my faith-sized prayer. It's a little bit bigger. She didn't like the fact showing up with a bunch of kids to shovel. Maybe she would like TA jelly. Nice little ribbon around. So I took the TA jelly and I wrote Merry Christmas on it, and I took it to her door. And I got ready to ring the doorbell. And I couldn't do it. So finally I put the jar down, rang the doorbell, and ran away. Mom pointed out, did God answer your prayer? Were you able to do something? I said, yes, but my prayer was that she would like it. Mrs. Jones actually sent back a card saying, thank you. And as I progressed, by the time I went away to college, Mrs. Jones and I were good friends. And come to find out how we became good friends, because my next prayer was, I want Mrs. Jones to come talk to me. Now that's a pretty big prayer. He'd answered the first prayer, my faith had increased. He answered the second prayer, my faith increased. I now prayed a big prayer, that Mrs. Jones would have to come talk to me. Well, I had a paper route. And on the paper route, by the way, kids today will never have paper routes. You know, roll up the papers, go out, throw them, go out, collect the money. And one of the houses I had, when I walked up to the house, the person who answered the door would always reach up, grab a check, and hand it to me. It was always made out. I went up there this one time, and the man says, I'm sorry, we have no check for you, but I will get one to you. So, well, I'll be back in a week. So, no, I'll get one to you. Mrs. Jones came and knocked on the house. The house that I delivered papers to was her pastor's house. This woman, she went to church. Who knew? I didn't know demons went to church or witches. It didn't dawn on me. And she came to my house, as my pastor said, give you this check for the paper. And so God answered, and as it progressed, we became good friends. When I came back home from college and drove into the driveway, sometimes Mrs. Jones was the first one to meet me there. God steps us up in faith. He will answer our prayers. He asks, where is our faith? And as we learn to trust Him, to believe Him when we even don't see Him, He wants a relationship with us. More than things, more than the water coming in the boat, He wants a relationship. Well, so they get to the boat, and they get across. And then He arose and rebuked the wind and the raging of the water, and they ceased, and it was calm. He said, where's your faith? And they were afraid and marveled and said one to another, how can this be? For He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey Him. And then He goes over to where no good person goes. See, I said, I want to invite people. I am not much into going, but you'll hear me tell stories of like going to mission trips we made to Mexico, been to Honduras, been to Romania and Hungary and such like this. But those are places that wanted us. When we went down to Mexico, there was a huge crowd to meet us at the airport. And after a 3-hour drive down to Chiapas, where the church was, they had a fiesta for us around midnight. Now, after a long flight, I'm not really interested in a fiesta, but they got little kids around, they got food and everything. They wanted us. That's not where Jesus went. Whenever went to Romania, I got to spend time in the orphanage. They had a place for me to stay. They wanted me. When I went to the gypsy village, they wanted me. That's not where Jesus went. He went where he wasn't wanted, where the good Jews would not go. Now, closest I got to that was whenever, for over 10 years, I did prison ministry. But still, that's protected and nice, and I don't have a heart for prison ministry anymore. Was deceived not only by a prisoner, but by judge and by chaplains and counselors and everything. And I got hurt real badly. And even though over 10 years I did prison ministry, I can't go back. Jesus would go places I can't go. Jesus would go places I don't want to go. Jesus would go places where, well, you'd be ashamed to find out if your preacher went there. But Jesus will go there. There is no place that's out of bounds for God. Through the depths of the ocean, through the heights of the mountain, through the worst areas, there's no place out of bounds for God to go. And that's where he went. And when he got there, the worst person of that area, he's in a place that doesn't care for Jews, but he goes to a person that even these people don't like, and that's the demoniac at the tomb. And you read about that, and if you're reading in Luke or reading in Matthew, Luke has 2, Matthew has 1. Now, I'm a little bit odd, you know that already. But anyway, I like to read what the opposition says. I love the science that shows that we live in a young earth created by a great God. And I love the science of that. I love to talk about radiometric dating. I like to talk about dinosaur bones, fish, fossils, and I like to talk about these things and seeing the evidence of the fact is science shows that we live in a young earth. But I also like to read what the evolutionists had to say. Richard Dawkins has a YouTube video out. It says the one greatest proof that Christians have to ignore that proves that evolution is true. Dawkins has millions of views. And in there he talks about pseudogenes and how that is the greatest proof. The fact is that because they've been able to break down the human genome, and there's genes that are just, there's left over from evolutionary science. The number one greatest proof, well, since he wrote that video, they found out those pseudogenes are not left over. They each have a purpose. Every single genome that we have has a purpose. And yet, his is still out. And I like to read what the evolutionists have to say. I like to read what those that say that the Bible contradicts itself. And this is one of the areas. I said, well, is it one demonic person in the Gadarene tombs, or is it 2? The Bible contradicts itself. Well, no, it doesn't. And I love how they stretch. I mean, you read the news. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, we had an assassination attempt on Trump. I read news reports about that. Oh, sometimes I read a news report that a man named Corey was killed at that. Corey's not mentioned in every one of them, nor were the other 2 people injured. Each time the news story, it focuses on different areas. And the Bible does also. Lee Strobel, in the case for Christ. Lee Strobel, are you all familiar with Lee Strobel? Yeah, some of you are. He writes a little bit above my head. Case for Creation is a great book. Case for Miracles is a great. I love every one of his books. But he was an atheist. And he was mad because his wife became a Christian. How could she lose brain cells? I married an intelligent woman and now she's become a Christian. And he was griping about it. And this was a man who had won awards for his ability to do news, to do investigative reporting. And he was griping to his editor. His editor was also an atheist. His editor told him, says, you're an investigative reporter. You investigate it. If it's false, expose it. You're good at that. If it isn't, say that. But quit griping about it. Investigate. And this atheist started investigating by talking to other atheists, by talking to priests, by reading the documentation. And he came to the point that he realized it's true, that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And that he walked a perfect life, died for our sins, was resurrected on the third day, and lives forever. And he went to his wife. And I don't know, the movie about his life, The Case for Christ. Have any of you all seen that movie? You have. Great movie. He was part of it. He said it was kind of hard watching his own life unfold. But he went to his wife and says, you know, I've done all this investigation, and I realize that Jesus is God. And that he died and he was resurrected. So what do I do with this information? What do I do with it? That's why it says, this is the time you talk to Jesus and tell him that you know that you're a sinner, but you want him to be Lord of your life. He says, how do I do that? It's just this conversation between you and God. And Lee Strobel now is pastor of a large church and reaches thousands with the gospel of Christ. The evidence out there. So I like to look at what other people are saying. There were two demonic people here. And Jesus, and these are not just weird people. It says the fact is that they were naked. Or is it naked? Anyway, they ran around without any clothes on. Cut themselves. They were be chained up and break the chains and take off through the wilderness. They would not live in any house, under any dwelling. They lived among tombs. Now, for the Jew, not only is Jesus walking over to Gadarenes, where no good Jew would go, he's going to the tombs. For a Jew to go to the tombs, he was unclean for 7 days. And Jesus chose to go there, to seek and to save, to reach, where he had thousands following him in Israel. He has now gone to where there's two. Or there's one that actually receives him. He goes and he seeks out that who nobody else would. That is the God that we serve. I stand here and say, I don't want to go. I don't want to go to pick whatever place you have that is just, you'd be embarrassed to have your preacher there. I don't want to go there. I have no desire. God goes and he seeks out and goes to places we don't go. And he sat down with this man at the tomb, and they were surprised to see that this man who was naked, who ran through the tombs and such, was clothed and in his right mind. And God made a difference in his life. And from there he says, Jesus, let me follow you. Let me go back to Israel and follow you. He says, no, stay here. Stay here because people will listen to you and tell them what's happened to you. See, I know that's true. We each have our own realm of influence. Mine, I'm around my kids, my grandkids. I have got neighbors. And the fact is, I don't run across many lost people. And I imagine most of y'all live in similar circles, okay? You've talked to, you know everyone. If someone outside of our circle, if God touches someone outside, take not only a place we wouldn't go, a person that is just off the deep end, and God touches their life, They have a circle of influence that we will never touch. Eddie Williamson, who passed away recently, he was a pastor of the Backroom Fellowship in Chitoba. Whenever I met Eddie, when we moved to Oswego, Eddie was antagonistic toward. He made fun of anyone who went to church. Eddie was known for foul language and drinking. He was a good guy. He just hated church. And he made fun of anyone. And God got hold of Eddie right before Christmas. And he came home and he threw the Christmas tree across the house. But because of him seeing his own anger, God brought him to his knees and struck him to the floor. And Eddie's life was dramatically changed. And because of that, Eddie had a circle of friends that he played softball with, that he hunted with, and such like this. It was outside the reach of anybody I ever knew. And throughout the next few years, several people came to know the Lord because Eddie was changed. God reached Eddie in his house when he was half drunk and mad and threw a Christmas tree. Because God reached him, many others were reached that I would never touch. God found this demoniac and he sent him back to the town and said, okay, you stay here because people will listen to you. Now, so how does that further apply to me? See, as I told you, sometimes I tell God, this is the way I want things. And I know that I've got pluses and I've got minuses. There was one time that I had to be in Jacksonville, Florida, the next day for a very important meeting. And before that, on the day I was supposed to fly out, we had a meeting at our corporate office. And I was in charge of the meeting, and there was a whole bunch of attorneys there. Now, attorneys charge by the minute. It doesn't matter what they're doing. We had 3 different sets of attorneys there. Our attorney, their attorney, and the other attorney, and such like this. And it went on long, so we ordered lunch in, because if we went out to eat lunch, we would still be charged by hour. And I was trying, because I had to get to the airport. And time was just running out. And I was trying to get this meeting, I was trying to get everybody together so we could come to an agreement and get this thing resolved and still make it to the airport to catch my plane. We got it done. I figured I had just enough time to get to the airport. And so I was going to Kansas City. So I drove to the airport, and there was just construction. And it seemed like whenever I'd pull up, and I'd be the first one, the sign would turn around and say stop. So I'd be in the front of the line. I'd have to wait. But I still had enough time. And then I was right behind where there was an accident, so I witnessed an accident. So I had to pull off because I had to give my ID to the highway patrol to say, yes, I did witness the accident. And if I drove fast enough, well, you're not supposed to speed. But you know what? If you catch a car that is speeding, you get behind it, maybe the highway patrol, some of y'all done the same thing, yeah. Okay, they're a smoke screen. They're going faster, so I get behind them. They take an exit. I have to slow back down, wait for the next guy to come up faster, get behind. And I get there, and I rush, and security was just, I got the slowest TSA agent on the world. And I had to take off my shoes and everything. And as I made it to the gate, it was already closed, and they're not going to reopen that door for anything. I was able to stand there, and I saw the jet take off. I knew the only thing I had left was to go get a room because I was going to get the very first flight out the next morning so I could still make it there on time. And I called Bev and said, I don't know what God is up to, but, you know, it seems like he has just put stop signs on my way. And I told God that night, I'm tired. I'm worn out. I am not a very good Christian. My faith is very low. I am discouraged. There's nothing I can do. What have you got? God, you do it without me because, I'm no good at this anyway. I'm not a real outspoken witness. I'm just, and I told God that, you know, surely whatever you got planned, it doesn't include me. And I had a book with me that I was reading. The book was called You're Not Alone. It's about people who have lost limbs, lost arms, lost legs. And Sabelich was the name of the man and his company that made artificial. And I had it because a man in our company, just a few days before, on Thanksgiving Day, had got underneath a train and severed both of his legs. And Chuck Tiemann was one of the people featured in the book, You're Not Alone. And I asked Chuck to send me a book, and he did, and he signed it. So I had a book. I wanted to read it before I gave it to Eric, the young man who lost his legs. And so I'm on Southwest Airlines. And so I get on the plane, and I decided I'd wait. Southwest Airlines, everybody, you can pick where you sit. I waited. Instead of wanting to be one of the first, I waited. So I was the last person to get on. And I looked on this plane, and I walked down, and there was one aisle. There was one man sitting way over there, and there's an empty window seat over here, and nobody else on the row. It was an early morning flight. There wasn't many people there anyway. Southwest Airlines with the humorous stewardess has it. Okay, everybody sit next to the windows and wave so people think we're full. But anyway, I picked an empty spot and got my book to read it. And this guy that was on the other side said, "Are you reading a good book?" I really didn't want to talk to anyone. And I took the book and I chunked it at him. He says, "Oh, have you lost a leg?" I said, "No. But someone I know, he signed the book and his story is in there. His name is Chuck Tiemann." So the guy read that little bit about just Chuck Tiemann, not the whole book. He said, "That guy's a Christian." I said, "Yes, he is." He said, "I've got to talk to you." And he gets up out of his chair and moves over to sit beside me, orders himself another beer, and starts and says, "I'm going to talk to you. We got a long flight, and I'm going to talk to you." And he said, "You don't know who I am, do you?" I said, "No, I don't." He said, "I'm Kerry." "Okay, hi, I'm Walter." He said, "No, I'm Kerry King." I said, "I'm Walter Keener." I don't know where this guy's going. He said, "I'll give you a hint. Slayer." Meant absolutely nothing to me. And I told him. Now, through the conversation, come to find out, Kerry King is well known in a particular genre of music. It's acid metal. And I learned in conversation with him that him and Jeff Hanneman formed this band, and the lyrics are nasty. The music can't be called music. It's noise that makes your ears bleed. It is horrible. Now, I didn't know all this. He's had to explain to me what type of musician he is. Now, after the flight is over such, I'd go to a store, and I decided I would buy a CD because I was going to be praying for Kerry King. I still pray for Kerry King to this day. I was going to buy a CD so I could know what type of person I was praying for. And I walk in there, and I go down the CD, and there's this area that says, "Warning, this stuff is vile. It'll melt your brain. Not for anybody underage or anybody that wants to be human." And it's just a horrible area. And I reached in there, and I pulled out the CD, and it's also marked graphic. And so I put it back. I thought, wait a minute, I'm an adult. I can handle this. I want to know what I'm praying for. So I reached back and I grabbed that CD and put it right back. I said, wait a minute. I don't care how bad that is, how demon-possessed it is. I'm a child of God. I can rebuke the devil, and I am in charge. The gates of hell shall not prevail against us. I can do this. And I grabbed that CD, I put it back. And I turned around and I started to walk out of the store. I took about 4 steps. I said, no, I'm going to get that. I go back there, I pick up the CD, put it back down, and run out of the store. I just couldn't do it. pretty bad. I did some research on the internet afterwards. But I'm sitting next to this guy, and he's wanting to talk to me, and the jet takes off. Now, it's very noisy, and he says, by the way, my hearing has been damaged by the type of music that I do. You're going to have to talk loud. So now he starts quizzing me. I tell him about my wonderful wife, tell him about my kids. He also has several women, kids on the side. He asked me about my house, and I love the place that God had given to us to live in. I've now sold it to our daughter and her husband. And it's just, for me, for a kid that grew up where I remember getting up one morning and my feet hit the floor and the snow scattered because we were living, it wasn't a barn, but the horses did live in that house before we lived there. We had to remove the hay, and also the hay the horses had already processed out of there before we could move there. And here I'm living in this nice house. Carrie's nonplussed. He has 3 mansions scattered across the United States. I tell him about my job. I love the job I was doing. I was able to see. Here I am going to Jacksonville. I've been to several areas. I have things to do of value. He says, I make more money than you'll ever make. And we talked about where I traveled. I've just been back from Europe, been to Vienna, been to Germany, such like this. And so conversation went on for an hour and a half, talking at the top of my lungs. Everybody around me, nobody else is talking because they can't, because I'm so loud, between Kerry King and I yelling at each other. And we get close to the end, and Kerry grabs hold of my hand. He says, what makes you happy? I said, well, I've told you about, my family. He says, and my job and my house. He said, things, those are things. Things don't make you happy. There's nothing like that can make you happy. I've got more than you ever will have. Things don't make you happy. I demand you tell me what makes you happy. And I already told God I didn't want part of this. And I found myself at the top of my voice. I mean, I'm having to say that at the age of 8, I came to know Christ, my Lord and Savior. And this Christ, this Jesus, walked this earth a perfect, sinless life. He died on the cross for my sin, was buried and resurrected the 3rd day, and lives forever and will come again. And I'm having to tell this talk that everybody on that whole plane was having to listen to. I think even the pilot heard me. Sometimes I wonder if the plane passing the other direction caught part of the conversation. And so I'm having to give testimony to who God is. And the plane landed, and Kerry said, pray for me. I said, Kerry, you can pray for yourself. You can talk to this God. He said, no, you pray for me. And being this plane was empty, there was a little old lady that came from the back, and she was carrying, looked like a large print Thompson Chain to Reference Bible, which means it's about as big as a suitcase. She comes by, pats me on the shoulder, says, God bless you, son. She goes on off the plane, and then I was trying to get my stuff, and the lady in front of me says, you've been to Vienna. I'm going there next week. What can you tell me? So now I get in a conversation with her about Vienna. So I know people have heard this. So now I'm getting ready to get off the plane, and I walk in. Here's a couple, and they've got this little baby, and he turns to me and says, here, bless my child. I'm really a fish out of water now. God bless you. May you be like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and be blessed. Bless you. Have the child back. I don't know what I'm doing. I get off there. I've never seen Kerry King again. See, I don't know who on that plane God wanted to hear the gospel. I don't know who he was trying to reach. I know that Kerry King has never, he's still a very ungodly, unsanitary, living a lifestyle and with language that is embarrassing. But who was he trying to reach? Well, I know one person he was trying to reach. That was me. I couldn't stand up and say, God, I don't want part of this. God chooses to use us to reach those that he wants to reach. And the fact is, if he didn't use us, even the rocks could cry out. We have a story. The fact is that he'll even use a donkey, which comes pretty close to me as it is. I mean, God doesn't need us. He chooses to use us. And he went to see this demoniac in the Gadarenes and speak to him, and he took along the disciples because he wanted them to participate, to see. God is sovereign. God is in charge. He's not sitting up here telling us, these are the rules that you have to live by. He says, this is love. I want you to know that I love you. And the relationship we have, we can build on. And God gives us the opportunity to participate in the great things that he does. Oh, yes. Sometimes there's a long boat ride and there's a storm that comes up. And there's times that I can't see God working. But I know he is. He has built my faith to know the fact is he's out there. And you want to pray for me? Pray for my stubborn streak when I yell at God and say, I don't want any part of it. Be willing to say, God, you know who I am. You know my failings. You know where I sin. You know thoughts that go through my mind. The fact is, but I love you. And I do want to participate in what you have to do. Oh, we look at each other here. I have no idea what God's doing now. I'm not a prophet. He doesn't give me insight in the future. And yeah, I'm not going to change dramatically. I'm still going to work on teaching the book of Revelation and changing the sign out on the highway and inviting people to come here. Do you know what? I've got a God who loves me. And he is doing things that I don't understand, I don't know about. May never know about for eternity, but he is still God Almighty. Let's have a word of prayer. I mean, we have a song to end today. Okay, Lord, we thank you for the stories that are in the Bible. They weren't stories you wrote just then. You wrote through the book of Acts, and you're writing on our hearts even today. You're working among us. You're a God who writes our stories. And you are still seeking and saving those who are lost. Oh, there is nobody that you don't desire to come into a relationship with you. And I pray that you allow me, you allow us to participate in whatever great thing you're doing. That we will be open enough to get in the boat, to go through the storm, to participate, that we may be able to see what you are doing in a mighty way. Place a special blessing upon each person that's here. Honor them as they've honored you today by their presence. And we give you the honor and glory. In your name I pray.